Welcome to part 5 of the newly renovated and expanded historic auto attractions in Roscoe, Illinois. Now we're going to see what remains to me the best and most impressive collection here, the Kennedy exhibit. While it's largely the same as it was, an extra room has been added to the exhibit, so it's less cluttered and there are a few new artifacts. This open-top limousine was used to drive President Kennedy when he visited Fort Stewart, Georgia in November of 1962, not long after the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved. He sat right there. A lot of this exhibit is focused on the assassination, and here's the first of many impressive relics from that horrible time, the taxicab, which Harvey Oswald used to take just after shooting the president. Supposedly. The driver reported that he tried to make conversation, asking his passenger what he thought happened, but Oswald was stone cold. Those two outfits belong to Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. And this is a full alcove featuring the clothing of Camelot, an impressive collection of Jackie Kennedy's outfits. She was very well versed in fashion, and during her time as First Lady, she hired the famed designer Oleg Cassini to design and create her custom outfits. So here are over 20 of her custom-made Cassini outfits. This evening gown was worn by the First Lady at a fancy White House event. That's also the necklace Jackie wore for the cover of this issue of Life magazine. This is an inaccurate replica of the 1961 Lincoln Continental limousine that JFK was riding in when he was assassinated. This replica is missing the middle seat where Texas Governor John Connally sat. There are two wax figures of John and Jackie Kennedy as they appeared just moments before it happened. The real one is at the Henry Ford Museum. Some serious alterations were made on it as it continued service. But directly behind this replica is the real Secret Service car that was following directly behind the presidential limo on that fateful day. This vehicle is absolutely incredible because it is in its original condition. This is just how it looked on November 22nd, 1963. Agent Clint Hill was stationed on this car during the Dallas motorcade, and after the shots rang out, he leaped onto the backside of the presidential limo to try and shield Jackie, as can be seen in the Zapruder film. Wow, that is incredible. Many of the pieces in this exhibit are from the Robert White collection, which was the largest private assemblage of Kennedy relics. Many were obtained directly from Evelyn Lincoln, JFK's personal secretary, and eventually the owner of this museum got a hold of a lot of that collection, and Mr. Lensing has also acquired some other fascinating relics. John F. Kennedy gifted this fine Lord Elgin watch to Jackie's secretary. These are samples of suit patterns that were sent to JFK by his tailor in June of 1963. Those JFK 464 bumper stickers were presented to JFK at the Oval Office. He put them in his desk drawer, from which they were removed after his assassination. Sadly, there was no JFK for 64, and he briefly wore this 1960 campaign hat during a stop in Baltimore. This dictaphone and the earpiece were used by President Kennedy and his secretary Evelyn Lincoln for documenting purposes in the Oval Office. JFK's fedora is atop a weird wax head of him. It was designed by the famous hat maker Harry Ronick. That is a section of wood from the inaugural platform, on which JFK gave his famous inaugural address. This Lord Elgin watch was worn by John F. Kennedy during the inauguration ball. Those were JFK's shoes and the jacket that he wore to the inauguration ball on the night of his inauguration. This flag flew over the Capitol building on one of the days of JFK's funeral. This is interesting, a section of the original grassy knoll fence, which stood on the grassy knoll on Dealey Plaza, There are conspiracies that a shooter was hiding behind this fence. The fence was removed and placed in the former Conspiracy Museum in Dallas. The fence was heavily graffitied, and there someone wrote that it was Johnson. These are two pieces of upholstery from the assassination limo. All of the original upholstery was removed, and that piece is clearly stained with John F. Kennedy's blood. That's an original negative of the blood-soaked back seat taken by the FBI, and two original photos used by the Warren Commission. That's a letter signed by H.L. Hunt, an oil tycoon who had ties to Lyndon Johnson, and a common subject of JFK assassination conspiracies. These were the contents of President Kennedy's briefcase that he took with him to Texas. At least one of these was read en route. There's an original pamphlet for the art exhibition for President Kennedy and the First Lady. The room where JFK spent his last night in the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth was decorated with over 20 valuable art pieces, including a Picasso, I believe. JFK took that notepad from his room at the Hotel Texas and left it on board Air Force One that day. All of these papers were removed from Kennedy's Oval Office desk just after the assassination. This eyeglass case was removed from JFK's desk on Air Force One while en route from Dallas to Washington after the assassination. These eyeglasses were worn by Evelyn Lincoln while Lyndon Johnson was being sworn in aboard Air Force One. She is visible wearing these glasses in the iconic photograph of the historic moment. That's a section of wood from the platform on which John F. Kennedy gave his last official speech on November 21st at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio. That was the president's copy of the dedication speech at Brooks Air Force Base. It was removed from JFK's Air Force One desk. There's a report written by Kennedy's personal physician, who was there in Dallas and at the hospital when he died, and there are two prescriptions he filled at Palm Beach in 1963. That was Dr. Berkeley's medical bag. He did bring this one to Dallas, and below it is the purse that Evelyn Lincoln carried in the Dallas motorcade, along with most of the contents that were in it. She also put Jackie's blood-soaked gloves in that purse. And this is the original scissor jack from the X-100 limo that JFK was assassinated in. This is Lee Harvey Oswald's wedding dress. He wore this at his wedding, and he brought this suit with him when he defected to the Soviet Union in 1959. This here is the ambulance that transported a dying Lee Harvey Oswald to Parkland Memorial Hospital right after he was shot in the stomach during a transport deep within the Dallas Police Headquarters basement just 2 days after the assassination. This museum also used to have his original gravestone. That was Lee Harvey Oswald's sweater. Alongside this rifle, just like the one Oswald supposedly used, is the actual catalog for Klein Sporting Goods that Lee Harvey Oswald used to order the gun he would assassinate President Kennedy with. Just a couple hours after the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald was located and arrested at the Texas Theater, where this chair is from. The arresting officer of Lee Harvey Oswald was Nick McDonald, and this was his police uniform, alongside the jacket of Jack Ruby, who would then kill Lee Harvey Oswald. There's Jack Ruby's hat and the shoes he was wearing when he shot Oswald. Jack Ruby was a nightclub owner and involved with the mafia, so this Dallas entertainment guide was in his pocket when he killed Oswald. Jack Ruby used this bag to make cash deposits just before he killed Oswald, and there are some photos from Ruby's time at the Dallas County Jail. The gun on the left was Jack Ruby's backup gun, which he hid in his boot, and that Colt revolver was owned by Dallas Police Captain Will Fritz, who was involved with the investigation. There's a Dallas PD badge from the time, the original license plate from the Oswald ambulance, and this was Jack Ruby's black necktie with a mezuzah symbol. On this wall they have Jack Ruby's polygraph test, and a bullet fired from the gun that killed Lee Harvey Oswald. Here's a wax depiction of that notorious killing. Jack Ruby just walked in the basement surrounded by police officers on live TV and fatally shot Lee Harvey Oswald. It was incredibly bizarre. And this is a window from the Texas School Book Depository. This one was actually the window next to the one Oswald fired out of. It was located just to the right of that corner window on the 6th floor. That's kind of what the view of Dealey Plaza and the motorcade look like from this window. Extremely similar to Oswald's angle. In this small replication of the East Room of the White House is a flag-draped casket. This recreates the scene when President John F. Kennedy lay in state in the East Room on November 23rd, when various government officials came to pay their respects the day after the assassination. But that flag is the actual honor guard flag that draped John F. Kennedy's casket while he lay in state in the East Room. This flag was switched out before the casket was moved to lie in state on the Capitol the next day, and for the flag folding in Arlington. So that was a different flag presented to Jackie Kennedy, and that one is now at the JFK Presidential Library, but they almost never display it. So this is fascinating to see, and is displayed in a very reverent setting. By the way, that is an authentic chandelier that used to be in the China Room of the White House during the 1930s. This is the flag that flew over the United States Capitol on November 21st, 1963, which was the day JFK left for Texas. This is some of the mourning cloth that adorned the East Room while President Kennedy lay in state. This is a John F. Kennedy funeral card that was signed by his mother, Rose Kennedy. Here's an invitation to the President's funeral service at St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington, D.C. I have been inside there. This is an original copy of the itinerary for Kennedy's funeral procession, which was rapidly developed with a lot of Jackie's input. She based it on Abraham Lincoln's funeral. These rosary beads were carried by Father James N. Thompson, one of the two priests who gave Kennedy his last rites in the emergency room at Parkland Memorial Hospital. He carried these beads everywhere he went from that day on. And this is a pamphlet that Father Thompson wrote at Robert Kennedy's request, outlining his experience that day. The other priest who administered the last rites to the dying president was Father Oscar Huber, who owned this funerary cross. On the left is a letter written by Dr. Berkeley on his memories of November 22nd, alongside a letter signed by Father Huber. And this is another very iconic artifact of the slain president's funeral: Jackie's funeral hat and veil. She wore this one during the service at St. Matthew's Cathedral, and probably during the walk from the White House to St. Matthew's, but this one was removed before the burial ceremony at Arlington. That's pretty amazing. Jackie Kennedy was featured on the cover of Life magazine 17 times, and here's a copy of all of them. So this is the new area of the JFK exhibit, focused more so on the Kennedy family and administration. There's also some new artifacts in here. This case contains a lot of clothing of the Kennedy family, including several of Jackie's jackets, and on the left is JFK Jr.'s child Navy suit. That was Jackie's maternity dress, JFK Jr.'s riding suit, and some clothes of Caroline Kennedy when she was a child, like her Easter egg suit. That flag bunting was on the inaugural platform, and there are some tickets to the inauguration. Here are some suits of JFK, alongside this very unique John F. Kennedy campaign dress. This was worn by a supporter in 1960. That's pretty cool. And yes, these suits were worn by John F. Kennedy, the one on the right while he was a senator, and the one in the center while he was president. There's a piece of JFK's hair in there. These objects were owned by Carl Peden, who was a co-pilot of Air Force One during the Kennedy years. He was co-piloting when they returned to Washington from Dallas. That box contains some original film footage of President Kennedy taken on the morning of November 22nd in Fort Worth using that camera. This ledger is from the Oleg Cassini workroom and has 17 pages devoted to Jackie Kennedy designs, with some fabric samples. This leather case with a nail filer and a sharp knife was thrown away by Jackie Kennedy when she was packing to move out of the White House. Someone dumpster dived to save it. And this keychain featuring a medal of Pope John XXIII was on JFK's keychain for a time. This exhibit is just phenomenal. It's definitely as good, if not better, than the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. Those were John F. Kennedy's shoes. He wore those while he was a senator from Massachusetts. And I like this coffee with Kennedy cup from the 1960 campaign. This one was actually used by JFK during one of his campaign breakfast events. This is one of my favorite pieces in the entire museum. A preserved 60-year-old birthday cake topper from JFK's infamous birthday party at Madison Square Garden on May 19, 1962, where Marilyn Monroe sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" in a very sultry voice. This was part of the massive show birthday cake, and the owner of this museum has taken a very small bite out of it. Here are some original photographs from Madison Square Garden of JFK and Marilyn. There's definitely some controversy there, and Marilyn was dead a few months later. These are receipts from Marilyn Monroe's use of Execucar ink while in New York City for the president's birthday party. The top shelf contains some magazines featuring Robert F. Kennedy, John's younger brother who was also assassinated. That is a family Christmas card put out by Robert and Ethel Kennedy for 1967, which turned out to be their last Christmas together. This is a wax figure of Robert F. Kennedy, who also had an illustrious career and was running for president in 1968, during which he was assassinated, less than 5 years after his brother. This wax figure used to be with the World Leaders tableau. I think he fits better over here. There's a card for RFK's funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. This case contains even more articles of Jackie Kennedy. Again, she was very fashion conscious. There's some of her shoes and her formal gloves. That's a wax head of Jackie adorning her French room designer hat. And here are some of her perfumes and combs. This is a scale reproduction of Air Force One, showing what it looked like on the inside, at least back then. This is unique. The printing plate for the November 23, 1963 edition of the Dallas Morning News, with the headline that President Kennedy was slain on a Dallas street and that Lyndon Johnson became president. That's a no parking funeral sign because of JFK's funeral, and this is a large printing plate of the iconic photograph of JFK Jr. saluting his father's casket. On the left is a Dallas City Directory from 1963, which includes the information of many key figures from the assassination, and on the right is a Warren Commission report signed by all members of the commission, including future President Gerald Ford. These are Lee Harvey Oswald's exhumation files. His body was exhumed in 1981 to determine whether it was really his body or that of a Russian imposter. It was apparently him in there. These are Jack Ruby's second trial appeal papers, outlining Ruby's complaints that the court made several unjust moves against him. That envelope was in Evelyn Lincoln's purse and is stained with John F. Kennedy's blood. She even typed on there, it says, "My beloved president's blood." Blood rubbed off on the envelope when Jackie Kennedy took off her bloody white gloves and had Evelyn Lincoln hold them at the hospital. She put the gloves in her purse with the envelope. Here is a belt buckle and the gloves worn by Larry Bruce Smith, who was a Navy pallbearer during the funeral ceremonies of President Kennedy. Apparently the pallbearers hastily practiced by filling a casket with heavy sandbags to weigh 1,300 pounds, and they repeatedly marched on the Memorial Amphitheater steps at dark before the funeral. So yeah, the Kennedy collection here is mind-blowing. But there is still more here at Historic Auto Attractions, so take a look at Part 6. All episodes are linked in the video description. Thanks for watching.